Welcome to the webinar, Establishing a Screening Process. This is one of 11 webinars developed by the National Center on Response to Intervention for the RTI Implementation webinar series. My name is Amy Peterson, and I provide technical assistance support for the center. This webinar focuses on the steps for establishing a screening process in a school or district. In this section, you'll be asked to answer questions that can be found in the accompanying handouts. You can either answer the questions based on your own school or district experience or read the attached case study and use the information provided to fill out the handout. If you have not done so already, pause the webinar and print the handouts and case study. Please take the handouts out now, but do not complete them yet. I will give you time to complete each section throughout the webinar. If you are planning to use the case study for this section, pause the webinar and read the information provided. The Center has developed a series of webinars to cover information that's important for RTI implementation. On this slide, you can see the different webinars available in this series. While you can watch the webinars in any sequence, we recommend that you first watch What is RTI in order to ensure that you have an understanding for how RTI is discussed in the series. Prior to watching this webinar, it's also recommended that you watch Understanding Types of Assessment within an RTI framework and What is Screening. You may also want to watch Using Screening Data for Decision Making. The objectives for this training are to determine the needs, priorities, and logistics for screening, to use those needs, priorities, and logistics to select an appropriate screener, and to establish the procedures for screening. Having a clear purpose or reason for screening is an important precursor to establishing a screening process. District or school teams should come to consensus for why they want to implement screening. For example, are you using screening to evaluate your core curriculum, core instruction, and intervention effectiveness? To assess in decisions about resource allocation, or to maximize the performance on end-of-year test? Turn to the Purpose for Screening handout. Identify the top 3 reasons for screening at your school, or use a case study example to complete the handout. Pause the webinar to give yourself time to fill out the handout. Now that you have a clear sense of purpose for screening, we will cover 3 steps to consider for establishing a screening process. They are determining needs, priorities, and logistics, selecting a screening tool, and establishing procedures. The first step is to determine your needs, priorities, and logistics. As you can see on the slide, that might include selecting outcome measures, scope, population, timing, materials, funds, and training. One of the first decisions you need to make is what your outcome measure is. What is the criterion? What are you predicting to? For example, are you predicting to a performance on a state grade level assessment? Or are you predicting to performance on the SAT? The outcome measure should be an educationally valid outcome. Schools must choose age-appropriate outcome measures that capture student ability. You may have different screeners that assess different outcome measures. One screener will not assess all possible outcomes. Take out the Assessing Your Needs, Priorities, and Logistics handouts. We're going to use that throughout this section. Think about your own school or district, or the school in the case study, and answer the questions in Section 1. What is the outcomes you are focused on? As you can see on the slide, the following questions are asked. What is your focus? Both for outcome, for example, skill, academic, behavioral, or both? And what outcome measures, for example, reading fluency? Think about how they are aligned with the current curriculum and state standards. Pause the webinar to answer the questions and resume once you've completed this section. Next, you need to determine if you have a focus on the district level or the school level. Both are possible, but an advantage for district-level focus is that it provides the ability to evaluate district efforts. You can look at schools across the district. If you're just focused on the school level, it's very difficult to do this, and that's very difficult for resource allocation. You need to be able to compare schools within the district. It's important to think about whether screening is aligned with other initiatives, activities, and policies within the district and school. If not, we need to think about how we can align screening with those activities. It shouldn't be seen as an additional component, but a component that can be aligned with those other activities that are going on. For example, screening can assist schools with school improvement efforts, special education eligibility, and allocating resources. Think about your own school or district, or the school in the case study, and answer the questions in Section 2. What is our scope? Consider the following questions. Is it a district or school level focus? Are efforts aligned across the school and district? Are there other efforts in place that can be aligned with screening? Pause the webinar to answer the questions and resume once you've completed this section. tools may differ in their validity, reliability, and accuracy depending on the population. This is especially true for specific subgroups, like students in special education and English language learners. In addition, not all tools are equally valid or accurate across different grade levels. Think about your own school or district or the school in the case study and answer the questions in Section 3. Who is the target population? Consider the following questions. Who is the target population? What schools? Elementary schools, middle schools, junior high, high school? What grade level or levels? What specific subgroup or subgroups, for example, English language learners, special education students, Title I students? What are the demographics or characteristics of the population? Pause the webinar to answer the questions and resume once you've completed this section. In thinking about when screening will occur, it's important to remember that screening should occur more than one time per year. But in many schools and districts, it occurs at least 3 times per year, the fall, the winter, and the spring. Teams should create a clear schedule before the beginning of the year in order to see when screening will occur throughout the year. Screeners must target skills pertinent to the grade and times that the screen is administered. In other words, don't screen students solely on skills that they've not been taught yet or that are no longer pertinent, such as measures of phonemic awareness in 3rd grade. You also should consider how the screener will be administered. There are 2 main delivery options. One is individual and the other is class-wide. This will affect the amount of time for the screener. Think about your own school or district or the school in the case study and answer the questions in Section 4. What do we need to know about timing? Consider the following questions. When will screening occur? How frequently? Individually or as a group? What time is available for students to participate? For administration and scoring of the assessments? For reviewing results and incorporating them into instruction? Pause the webinar to answer the questions and resume once you've completed this section. Schools and districts need to consider who will be conducting the assessment and who will be serving on the data analysis team. These decisions need to be driven by identifying who has the prerequisite skills, who logically has the time, and so on. Think about your own school or district or the school in the case study and answer the questions in Section 5. What are the staff's role related to screening? Consider the following questions. What are the staff's roles related to screening, for conducting the assessments, for scoring the assessments, for interpreting the results? Does the staff have adequate skills and knowledge in order to do this? Pause the webinar to answer the questions and resume once you've completed this section. There are 3 main areas of focus regarding the logistics of administering a screener. You may need to consider the delivery options, the tools required for analysis, and the location where the screener can be administered. Think about your own school or district or the school in the case study and answer the questions in Section 6. What do you need for administration of screening? Consider, what materials are required for administering the screening tool? Are there different accommodations for students with special needs or who are learning the language? What statistical software will be used for analysis, reporting, and monitoring? Pause the webinar to answer the questions and resume once you've completed this section. Schools and districts must, of course, also consider the related costs for screening. There are a number of costs to consider. The first is the cost of the tool, or any necessary materials for administering the tool, such as a computer or a No. 2 pencil. You'll also need to consider the cost for training. An example of a cost for training for the Discovery Education Predictive Assessment Reading program is on-site professional development for $2,500 a day, or a professional development webinar for $250. Another cost to consider is the cost of instruction for identified students. The cut score or target instruction rate you select for screening should be related to the resources you have available for instruction. Think about your own school or district or the school in the case study and answer the questions in Section 7. What funds are available? Consider, what funds are available to purchase the screening tools and materials? What costs are associated with training? Are there additional cost demands for hiring staff? Pause the webinar to answer the questions and resume once you've completed the section. In order to help ensure that the measures are administered with integrity, anyone administering the screener must be trained. Training may include field-tested training manuals, professional development activities, in person or over the web, and ongoing technical assistance support. Training helps to ensure the fidelity to implementation. Think about your own school or district or the school in the case study and answer the questions in Section 8. What do you need for training? Consider how much time is available for training, both for screening tool administration and for data analysis. Who will provide the training and technical assistance? Will it be the publisher or an outside trainer? How much training is needed to implement the screening tool with fidelity and to use the assessment results for instructional decision-making? After you've determined your priorities, needs, and logistics, you're ready to select a tool. Use the Selecting a Screening Tool handout to think about the match between identified tools and the needs and priorities you've identified for your school, district, or the school in the case study. The three-step process for establishing a screening process includes determining your needs, priorities, and logistics, selecting a screening tool, and then establishing basic procedures. Some procedures that you need to consider are conducting a data review, establishing the at-risk population, assessing efficacy of the core and interventions, assessing progress of groups of students, and making decisions, and then reporting and sharing that data. During the screening data decision-making webinar, you've learned about the first 5 options: conducting data reviews, identifying the at-risk population, assessing the efficacy of the core and interventions, assessing progress of groups of students, and making decisions. We're going to now talk about the last one on the list, reporting and sharing data. Some things to think about when determining how you're going to share screening data are communicating the purpose of the data collected and the results. You don't want to just provide the results as a standalone, but you want to tell why you collected that information. You want to make sure that information is shared throughout the year. For example, following benchmark testing. So that would be in the fall and the winter and the spring if you're screening at 3 times during the year. You want to make sure that dissemination with discussion is the approach you use. Don't just hand out the information, but ensure that you have a discussion about that. You should encourage all school teams to talk about results, patterns, possible interpretations, and likely next steps. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Establishing a Screening Process. To find more resources on the topic or view other webinars in the Implementer series, visit the Center's website. You can also view additional information from the RTI Action Network and the IDEA partnership. Thank you.